Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. Today I've got a full review for you on the brand new Tier 8 premium Soviet heavy tank, the IS-3A, which is different to a lot of other Tier 8 premium vehicles as the gun is very competitive. In fact, the IS-3A specializes in having a better 122mm than one of your favorite Soviet vehicles in the game, the IS-3. If you're a fan of the IS-3, then this might be the tank for you to be able to pick up a huge amount of credits, some very good crew training, while still having such a competitive gun. And even if you don't like the IS-3, you've got to check out this 122mm main armament, which fires APCR as standard, making the shell velocity on this tank feel like a Tier 9 or Tier 10 medium. I'm going to quickly run down all of the statistics in the garage of this vehicle and then follow it up with some Ace Tanker gameplay. So firstly, there's something very important to highlight. The name in the garage is currently IS-3 Auto. Wargaming have told me that this will be changed to IS-3A to avoid confusion of the tank. And that's because while this is called the IS-3 Auto, it doesn't have an autoloader. It has a 122mm single-shot main armament that is special in its own way, as I will highlight later on. So the description of the IS-3A is as follows. In 1956 to 1957, the Military Armored Forces Academy developed a speculative design for a new loading system on the IS-3 and T-10 heavy tanks. The IS-3 variant featured a double-row ammo rack with an automatic loading system. The crew was reduced to 3 members, commander, gunner, and driver. And the turret was redesigned in order to accommodate the loading mechanism, while the vehicle only existed in blueprints. So visually, the vehicle is very similar to the standard IS-3. As you can see, the hull model is almost identical as far as I'm concerned. And the only real difference to be able to visually tell the tanks apart will be the turret. We can see a distinct lack of machine gun on top of the IS-3 Auto. But let's use TanksGG to compare between the IS-3A and the regular IS-3. So the IS-3A is on the left and the IS-3 is on the right. Immediately, you can see a DPM advantage to the IS-3A, as instead of firing 4.51 rounds a minute as the standard IS-3 does, it gets 5.13 rounds a minute rate of fire. But the alpha damage of the tank is still the same at 390. And this isn't a small DPM advantage for the IS-3A, it's over 250, which gives it a 13.5% advantage over the standard IS-3. As this is a premium tank, and usually premium tanks are weaker than their standard comparison, you'd think that the IS-3A would have worse penetration. And yes, it does. It has 4mm worse penetration than the IS-3. But that's not catastrophic. Most Tier 8 premium heavy tanks have 175mm of penetration. That's not the case with the IS-3A. One thing that should be mentioned, however, is that the standard rounds on this tank are APCR, and the premium rounds on this vehicle are heat, with the heat penetration on the IS-3A of 270, which is more than enough to get through the front of most Tier 10 tanks. This different type of ammunition on the IS-3A has a few implications for it. One, APCR rounds lose quite a lot of penetration at long ranges. But alternatively, they have a much higher shell velocity of 1,400 rather than 1,007 on the standard IS-3. For me, that is a massive advantage. You have to give your targets less lead. And that makes hitting opponents at long range much easier because you give them less opportunity to change the direction of their travel. However, it should be noted that while the premium rounds of the IS-3A do have 270mm of penetration, which is 5mm more than the APCR rounds of the IS-3, as they are high explosive anti-tank, that means that it's going to be much harder to get through thick spaced armor, such as on the side of an E100. The IS-3A also gets the same ammo capacity of the standard IS-3 of 28 rounds. So far so good for the IS-3A, right? Well, unfortunately, this is where the good news starts to end. The vehicle has worse weapon handling, being much less accurate, with 0.46 accuracy rather than 0.4 accuracy on the IS-3. Also, the vehicle gets more dispersion while moving, and much more dispersion when turning the turret, as well as after firing and having less gun elevation. This means that you're going to have to be aiming for a lot longer, especially after short bursts of movement and your turret traverse. Unfortunately, the IS-3A has the same gun depression as the IS-3, which is a lowly 5 degrees, which makes working on ridgelines quite tricky sometimes. Funnily enough, the vehicle is actually faster by 2 kilometers an hour, but has terrible engine power of 520 compared to the 700 of the standard IS-3. This makes its horsepower to ton ratio just over 10.5, whereas the IS-3 nearly has 14.5. And if you thought that the ground resistances were going to be vastly improved to try and balance this out, well, that's not really the case. On hard terrain or on soft terrain, it's the same, but it's only on medium terrain that you kind of get a bit of compensation. What this means is that the IS-3A is much slower than the standard IS-3, and it does feel like a slower heavy tank, especially when you have to take it off-road. The turret traverse is also slightly worse, as well as the track traverse on the tank, which is 4 degrees worse than the standard IS-3. So certainly bad news with regards to mobility and gun handling for the IS-3A. But thankfully for the vehicle, the armor is exactly the same as the IS-3, which is incredible for a Tier 8 heavy tank, having 110mm of frontal armor, 90 at the side and 60 at the rear, with one of the most resilient turrets with 249mm of frontal armor, 172 at the side and 100 at the rear. Frontal armor-wise, the IS-3A is a funny old tank. It does have this pike nose that you see on a lot of high-tier Soviet vehicles. The 110mm of frontal armor is all on this upper plate here, with a couple of patches here of 130. So if you're engaging one of these tanks, you certainly do not want to shoot these extra bits of track, I believe, that are on the front of the tank, as they count as 20mm thicker armor. The lower plate of the IS-3A is also 110mm thick, which frequently means, because of its low profile, that people stupidly shoot down at the lower plate and it bounces. What you need to try and do when penetrating one of these tanks is basically shoot the flattest front plate. So if the IS-3 is angled like this, we can see that this whole area here is only about up to 180. However, if he turns his tank over here, then it's the same on the other side. Alternatively, if he's not angling at all, you're still better to try and shoot down on these areas than you are to try and hit the lower plate, unless somehow you're underneath him, which is very unusual considering he is a low-profile vehicle. The side armor on this tank is magic. Look at all this spaced armor over the side. There's 30mm, which means that even if the IS-3 is not angled at all, you still have to get through 200 and up to 225mm of effective armor. To counter this spaced armor with well-angled protection behind it, you need to shoot below that if you want to go through the side of an IS-3. And don't be fooled if an IS-3 does angle at 45 degrees, as with the gigantic tracks covering most of the vehicle, you're going to have up to like 250 to be able to reliably get through it, and you're far better to shoot the front flat plate. There's also one significant weakness that the IS-3A retains from the standard IS-3, and that is this area of very thin armor on top of the vehicle. Here we can see it on the standard IS-3. It's only 20mm thick and very easy to hit. The IS-3A has the same problem. This whole area on top of the vehicle is 20mm thick, which can easily be overmatched and is your ticket to trying to penetrate the turret. And that's really the only place on the turret that you should shoot, because as we can see frontally, the armor, you need at least about 300mm of penetration plus to be able to get through it. And you'd have to be crazy not to just shoot onto the hull or onto the top of the turret. Funnily enough, the vehicle actually gets 50 more hit points than the standard IS-3, but has a much weaker engine that is more prone to be set on fire. And unfortunately for the IS-3A, it retains the shocking view range of 350 meters, which is probably one of the few very disappointing aspects of the standard IS-3, and something that you can take advantage of on the battlefield. You're likely to be able to spot an IS-3 or an IS-3A before he will be able to see you. I should also probably make a passing mention to the fact that the standard rounds on this tank are not cheap. They cost 1,180, which is more than the standard rounds on the IS-3, as they cost 1,025. But this shouldn't make a huge difference, as the IS-3A is a premium vehicle and makes a huge amount of credits. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, as this design was intended to have an auto-loading system, the vehicle doesn't need a loader, which bizarrely means that this fairly large vehicle only needs 3 crew. And that's a bit of a negative for this tank, as many people use premium vehicles to train up their crews for other tanks. And so while you're going to be making very decent crew training on these 3 gentlemen, you might find that your loader lags behind on your standard tanks. So you might be wondering which crew member has the opportunity to get safe stowage on this tank. And interestingly enough, the commander and also the gunner both have the option of getting loader skills and loader perks, which is frankly a little bit of an inconvenience for people who want to be using maybe their IS-7 crew in this tank. And I expect that some people might go as far to have a specific crew just for the IS-3A. But I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's get stuck into some gameplay. So here we go. Just to clarify, I am playing on the live server. This was all recorded not on a test server, which means that in theory everyone should be playing properly, right? Although there were quite a few lemming trains and people just driving up alongside my tank, looking at me with their turret and taking screenshots. But I would too if I saw this absolute bizarre vehicle in my round. So not the best matchup for the IS-3 here. As we can see, there are tier 10 tanks on the enemy team and a lot of tier 9s. That's because this vehicle does not get preferential matchmaking. But you can't feel too bad about this tank not getting preferential matchmaking, as it does have that better DPM than an IS-3, and also similar kind of penetration at 221, so you can be very competitive. Now, focus on the mobility of the tank as we're going to go up this slope. You're going to see that it is very slow indeed once we lose the momentum that we picked up going slightly downhill on the way up into this northwestern corner. And so we should definitely try not to go up hills in this tank, and I would have probably been faster, possibly going along this more shallow gradient. Now, I picked this game really because I wanted to show how this tank performs against equal and higher tiered opponents. I had a lot of games where I was top tier where, well, you can imagine how it kind of went. If you get an IS-3 into a top tier game, your armor is fantastic, and when you've got a gun that's just as good as an IS-3, even better DPM than an IS-3, you do rip apart your opponents very nicely indeed. One thing you'll notice is that the aim time on this tank is, with the dispersion when you move, you do end up having to aim for quite a while to get your shots in accurately. And that's kind of awkward. It's unlike quite a few of the premium vehicles. Look, so long, and we kind of rushed it. We actually hit that thicker part of armor on the front of the tank that I was telling you about. The extra track counting as 20 millimeters of extra spaced armor, and that's probably why ricocheted off his frontal hull there. However, we're not missing that one. We both know about the flat surface on the front. When your pike nose is angled like this, the vehicle has terrible armor on the front. My only chance really would be if he was to hit the spaced armor along my side. We put a good hit into him, doing 396 damage, and we are on a riot right now as we are taking down this flank. Put another one into the Leopard and then proceed around the corner, and there's a Type 4 Heavy. That's a very heavily armored tier 9 Japanese heavy tank, but it does have weaknesses, as I'm hopefully going to be able to show you in a second. I ignore him and go for the KV-4 instead. Nice, flat, juicy shot right into the lower plate there. Easy, easy, easy money. So this is a bit of an awkward situation. It's quite hard to deal with when you've got so many tanks, but our team's doing a pretty good job of trying not to block each other. And there's the weak point on the Type 4 Heavy. When he angles his armor like this, it is super easy to be able to penetrate all of that area of his tank. The 5 degrees of gun depression preventing me from being able to get an effective shot onto the IS-3 until we get him right about now. Trying not to block this T110E3. He's reloading for the next 12 seconds, so it's not so significant. And our tracks absorbed a shot from a Jagdtiger there. That's pretty good going. And we've got more than enough penetration to put a good hit into the side of the IS-3. The IS-7 to my left gets taken out. It's unfortunate for him. And then this was an unexpected moment. Headshot. Ammo racking a half-health T110E4 for 1,260 damage. Got a rush of blood to the head for that one. The Jagdtiger just stuck right there, nothing he can do. And this is where having the DPM of this tank is lovely. He tracks me again, we repair the tracks, we get forwards, he gets finished off, and then I go and try and hunt down the AMX 1390. And so this is where the IS-3A is just, I feel, better than a standard IS-3. Having that extra DPM really allows you to clean up more effectively in these kind of engagements when sometimes a standard IS-3 wouldn't be able to. Check out the terrible accuracy though and very long aim bloom. It took us a while to be able to get that shot in, and we had to fire even when we weren't fully accurate there. Fortunately for us, an AMX 50-120 comes out around the corner, and that is not a tank you want to get caught in the crossfire. I thought with 3 tanks left on the enemy team that I could play more aggressively here, but unfortunately I've been caught out. Don't manage to hit him on the move, and I was just praying that the T-32 doesn't manage to finish me off. But actually, a sneaky bat chat manages to nail me from across the map. Good hit there. So while our brand new Tier 8 Soviet premium heavy tank, the IS-3A, is left as a smoldering wreck on the battlefield, I didn't really feel too bad about it, seeing how we picked up like 5,000 damage in 5 minutes in really bad matchmaking for this tank. My team go on to finish it off without many casualties. Let's just take a quick look at the post-game stats to see how many credits this thing picked up for this round. That's why you play Tier 8 premium tanks, right? 132,000 credits in less than 5 minutes. I don't think we fired one premium round in this game, meaning that we netted 103,000 credits profit. We also got a whopping amount of experience for our double, 4,769. And we finished top on our team by about an extra half of damage, even though there were some tier 10 tanks in this round, with 1,514 base. Just so you can see how much premium experience this vehicle makes, this would have been 2,271 with a premium account, and then we get the 227 extra bonus, giving us a fat amount of crew experience, or alternatively, regular experience that you could then convert off and use on other vehicles. The fairly resilient armor of the IS-3A held up as you would expect. Of the 10 rounds that we received, 5 penetrated, giving us 1,200 blocked, and a potential damage received of double our tank's health. And considering this matchup was so bad, and I don't think we even really went hull down that much, you can only really imagine what this tank is going to be able to do when it's top tier. Such as this round where we got 2,056 experience and 110,000 credits, of which 83,000 credits profit. In just over 4 minutes we did 4k damage, blocking 2,340 damage, which was practically 2/3 of the shots that we received, giving us a potential damage received of 4,000. Or alternatively, this round that we had on Tundra, where we got nearly 4,000 experience for our double, 102,000 credits, which was 76,000 credits profit, finishing second on damage behind this M103, but top on experience. So while I've only played the IS-3A 8 times, we've already managed to have a handful of awesome results in this vehicle. And I guess it feels fairly intuitive, considering that I've played the standard IS-3 for hundreds and hundreds of games. And so if you're in a situation like me with a lot of experience in the standard IS-3, you're going to jump into an IS-3A and completely tear it up. So you might be asking, well, how much is it going to cost? Well, it's available now on the North American server for $59, which comes bundled with 1,400 gold. Feels pretty unnecessary to do that wargaming. And that is pretty much the standard price of all of the kind of tier 8 heavy tanks. And so while that is a hell of a lot of money to pay for a virtual product in any video game, the pricing is pretty much the same as the other tier 8 premium vehicles. And hopefully we get something similar when this tank is coming out on the European server this month. And don't worry guys, it is very soon. And so you might ask now, well, is the IS-3A worth it? Well, from my experience and by taking a look at the stats and playing this tank for a few rounds, I think it's got to be one of, if not the best, tier 8 premium tanks in the game. And how could it not be? Because the IS-3 is probably one of the strongest vehicles tier for tier in World of Tanks. And just because the IS-3A loses a bit of the mobility, some of the gun handling, but gets a whopping rate of fire increase, doesn't really make it any worse. And considering that the economy of this vehicle is so good and will make an absolute huge amount of credits, combined with some great crew training on your Soviet heavy tanks if you're interested in that kind of thing. Personally, if I didn't have any tier 8 premium heavy tank, I think this would be the first one that I would pick up. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is the best deal. The tier 8 Soviet premium medium tank, the T-54 first prototype as an example, I feel is a very competitive tank as well. And it will cost you about a third less, as are a lot of the other tier 8 premium medium tanks, which generally cost about £20 rather than the likely £30 or £35 that this tank is going to cost when it hits the European gift shop later this month. One thing I do feel about this vehicle as well is that while it is very strong, it's in no way overpowered or pay to win. as although it does get a little bit of a DPM buff over the IS-3, I feel like all of the other drawbacks of the tank are probably still going to make it worse than the standard Tier 8 Soviet heavy tank. But nevertheless, to have a Tier 8 Premium that comes so close to being as good as the standard tank makes this a very interesting prospect. And so hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, or maybe it was just useful to you. If it was, please do consider giving it a like down below. It really helps the channel out. And if you guys want to see some more killer IS-3 gameplay, then simply click through up here or use the more info icon in the top right hand corner of your screen to see EUL87 having a monster game on the Kharkov map, with a prize-winning entry in the 300,000 subscriber replay competition. And let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about the IS-3A. Do you feel that it's the best Tier 8 premium tank in the game? Maybe the best Tier 8 premium heavy tank? Would some of you go as far as to say that the rate of fire makes this vehicle better than the standard IS-3? Or like me, do you feel that the original is still the best? And as always guys, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.